Iain Duncan Smith was elected leader of the Conservative Party by a majority of party members in 2001 after the party had suffered a catastrophic defeat in the general election of that year. Only 2 candidates were put to the members. By November 2002, after a disastrous party conference and poor showing in the opinion polls, there was increased speculation as to whether he should remain leader of the party.
We have got taxation going up, we have got government expenditure. Well, he's been there over a year. Well, he's been there over a year, you know, and it's about time we started having some fighting talk from the opposition. The Labour Party are destroying democracy. We see in the European constitution now that it's by the politicians, for the politicians. And where's the Conservative voice in all this? It's missing, and it's about time it started being heard.
Peter Oborne, he's not doing any good at all. Better dump him. What do you think?
I think that Mr. Strafford saying something which is a little bit unfair. I mean, after the last general election, when William Hague had been a tremendously oppositionalist, you know, he'd been a good tub-thumping opponent of the Prime Minister. Nobody ever denied that, and yet it didn't do the Tory party much good, any good indeed, in the general election. And so afterwards, almost everybody agreed that actually the Tory party wanted to engage more in public debate, not to be sort of knee-jerk critical of the government all the time. And actually, what Iain Duncan Smith has done, I think even his critics accept this, is move the thrust of Tory policy towards issues which people really care about, i.e. the health service, i.e. education, i.e. Transport, I mean, and away from those sort of slightly obsessive issues like Europe. And I think he's done that. That's been a strategy, and I think he deserves some credit for it.
Oh, well, he's not getting any credit from people like John Strafford. You talk to grassroots Tories, don't you? I mean, who are they suggesting would be a better alternative?
Well, I don't think at the moment they're suggesting anybody because it hasn't started.
Well, there must be somebody
in the muttering, there is a view beginning to come forward that really what we ought to do is have a bit of a clear out of the whole lot of those elected before '97 and have a totally fresh face, somebody, perhaps Liam Fox, Andrew Lansley, Oliver Letwin, some completely fresh approach to politics. And just in response to what Peter said, you know, William Hague, when he came, we'd been in government for 18 years. You know, now the Labour Party has been in government for 5 years. It's about time we started attacking. And it's all very well talking about debate, but there's no debate within the Conservative Party. The party conference was totally dumbed down. We had no motions for debate. The ordinary members of the party have been totally excluded from the policy development process. And it's, you know, we've got to start getting our act together.
Peter Oborne, isn't that the case? Because there is no ideological debate within the party, then the party just turns on itself.
Well, funnily enough, again, I don't really know where Mr. Strafford has been for the last 20 years or so. There's far more debate. If you go back to the old Tory party, remember that Maggie Thatcher at party conferences with the sort of faithful waving at us. You didn't have motions which were voted on in the floor. I mean, it's much more internal
Northern Ireland
debate.
in 1989, for example.
Much more internal debate now. I mean, one of the interesting things about the Tory conference 2 or 3 weeks ago in Bournemouth was the way in which, you know, there was an enormous amount of policy coming through onto the floor from the shadow cabinet, and which was being very vigorously debated. And I thought that there was much more attempt to engage the audience in these question and answer sessions and so forth than there has been for ages. I mean, ever before. I mean, the Tory activists and grassroots are being taken much more seriously than they ever have been. They've been given a vote in the leadership, probably a great mistake, but that's what they've been given.
Peter, the grassroots have been dumbed down. There's not a single vote on any issue at the Tory party conference. You know, it is nonsense to say that there's more debate. There's no debate at all. And, you know, the difference between dictatorship and leadership is that a dictator says, here are 25 policies, you're not going to discuss them, debate them, or vote on them,
okay,
but you're going to have to have them.
Very quick answer from Peter Oborne, then I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap it up.
Sorry, answer to that.
Yes, please.
I'm afraid that one of the problems of the Tory party at the moment probably is they've given too much democracy and voice to people like Mr. Strafford. I mean, they've lost
a paternalist voice.
Okay, all right. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Peter Oborne. John Strafford, thanks for joining us. You have to take your debate outside, I'm afraid now.
By February 2003, the pressure on Iain Duncan Smith was growing. In breach of the party's constitution, he fired the chief executive of the party and appointed Barry Legg in his place.
But after Michael Portillo's intervention today, there's now a feeling that fellow Tories aren't so much laughing with Iain Duncan Smith as at him. His leadership's now been brought into question, and this is one farce that could end in tragedy.
Part of my puzzlement is why the leader would want to bring this new speculation upon himself, because it does seem to me that it is brought upon himself, and newspapers quite accurately comment today that none of what has happened in the last week is the result of people shaking the tree. It's not the result of backbenchers in revolt or factions within the party. It seems to be a crisis manufactured at the centre.
Just over a week ago, Iain Duncan Smith had caused a smile. One poll put the Tories just a single point behind Labour. But then his handling of changes at the top of the party attracted such derision that Iain Duncan Smith might be reminded of a classic line from a Carry On film. Infamy, infamy. They've all got its infamy.
It's one thing to have the unite or die slap on the head, which we all got from the leader of the party, and calls for loyalty and all the rest of it. But the party leadership has to demonstrate competence as well. And this latest squall of sacking the chief executive, we don't know why the man's been sacked. Was he incompetent? Was he not turning up? What was going on? Nobody's explained why someone in such a short period of time, appointed by Iain Duncan Smith, was judged not good enough for the job.
But staunch supporters of Iain Duncan Smith say if he hadn't acted against his opponents within central office now, it would all have ended in tears.
This very same people, down to the last man, these Patilloites, they breached against Iain Duncan Smith, they undermined him, they ran off the newspapers of all sorts of tales, and I think that Iain, hopefully in time, unlike poor William Hague, has taken action.
But more sceptical voices say Iain Duncan Smith's now surrounding himself with political pygmies.
You don't look tall if you surround yourself by short grasses. That you look tallest when you're surrounded by the tallest grasses. In other words, you should actually bring around you the greatest array of talent that you possibly can. And if you're sure of yourself, you should be very prepared to surround yourself with people who disagree with you, because all they can do is sharpen your wits, and if you're right, all they can do is emphasize your belief in your own opinions.
He also said that the modernising party chairman, Theresa May, had been so marginalised in the decision-making process that her position was impossible.
I'm interested in getting on with the job that I have to do as chairman of this party, and that job is about continuing to move this party forward together with Iain Duncan Smith to develop the programme that we will be offering to people to show that we as a party have a conservative agenda.
Now, if Iain Duncan Smith was only under attack from modernisers within his party or from disgruntled backbench MPs, then he probably could laugh all this off. The trouble is that the very people who made him leader in the first place, the party's grassroots, are now far from chuffed. In the leadership election 18 months ago, if MPs had chosen a new leader, then Ken Clarke would have won. But under new rules, the local constituency parties played a decisive role. They despised Ken Clarke's pro-Euro views and opted for Iain Duncan Smith. But one prominent campaigner says they're not so delighted now.
Morale is absolutely rock bottom. I have never known it be so low. And the truth of the matter is that the voluntary party now for some time has been just totally ignored and treated with contempt by the leadership of the party.
It may be no laughing matter for Iain Duncan Smith in the near future. Next week, the Backbench 1922 committee of MPs have their get-together, and it seems they're not amused. And the party leader will be grilled by grassroots members of the ruling board. Then, next month, at the party's spring forum, the activists can tell him what they really think. When members of the Conservative Party's ruling board meet Iain Duncan Smith next week, the language is likely to be colourful. One board member told Newsnight that he was puce with rage at Iain Duncan Smith's contempt for his own party. And one normally loyal Tory MP told us that Iain Duncan Smith's leadership was now humiliating the party. Some of their colleagues are now speaking out openly.
To hear Michael Portillo today is the icing on the cake. I mean, it just is going to carry on. And I think that many ordinary party members have now come to the view that there has got to be a change in the leadership.
Undoubtedly, people will start to ask, is this really going to go on forever? And I don't think, in my experience of the Tory party, that their patience is infinite.
Next week, MPs who oppose Iain Duncan Smith will be collecting signatures for a motion of no confidence. It may become increasingly difficult for the Tory leader to carry on regardless.
Ian Watson. Well, I'm joined now from Bristol by the Shadow Cabinet member, Liam Fox. Liam Fox, let's deal with Michael Portillo first. He's a hugely popular figure in the party. You backed his leadership against Iain Duncan Smith. Do you accept he does speak for many when he criticises Iain Duncan Smith's judgment?
You know, I think Michael has made himself look a little marginalised this week. I've just been abroad for a few days, Kirsty. When I came back to the United Kingdom, the big issues that were facing us were the situation in Iraq, what's happening in the health service, asylum and immigration and law and order. And the issue that Michael Portillo has chosen to talk out about is who gets what place inside Conservative central office. I think that a lot of people who are watching this programme, especially Conservative supporters, will think this is a very bizarre agenda to be following. And I think that there is a widespread feeling that the best friends that Tony Blair has at the present time are Conservatives who want to embark on an endless internal debate rather than attacking a government which is failing on so many fronts.
The point is, though, you can't be seen to be credible in the big issues if the leader's judgment is seen to be flawed.
Well,
let me just quote to you, Michael Portillo, you don't walk tall when you surround yourself with short grasses. The point is that Iain Duncan Smith has brought this on himself by creating a crisis in central office.
I don't think there's a crisis at all. I think the leader of the party is perfectly entitled to have the people working closely with him that he feels most comfortable with. I mean, I wouldn't think that people would have thought it was a crisis if Tony Blair changed someone inside his own office who held a senior post. It's entirely reasonable. Theresa May is working very closely with Iain Duncan Smith. I spoke to her not 20 minutes ago. All this stuff about her position being impossible, I think, is complete nonsense from Michael Portillo. She's certainly never threatened to resign. That's a complete lie. This is really making a mountain out of a molehill, and I really do wonder what the agenda is of people who are distracting us from our job of really opposing a government which is failing on so many fronts by talking about what will be seen by most people to be utterly trivial issues about what happens inside central office. Because I have to say that the direction of the party is not determined by those who hold administrative posts inside the Conservative Party. It's decided as direction by the Shadow Cabinet.
Well, hang on. The chief executive position is a senior and rather important position. Iain Duncan Smith has appointed Barry Legg, a man considered by William Hague apparently too right-wing to be in the candidates list after 1997. What does that signal about the party? What is it that Barry Legg offers that the former chief executive didn't?
Well, that's really a question for the party leader to decide who he feels most comfortable with in terms of administration.
But you're a member of the Shadow Cabinet. You're party to these decisions.
The chief executive is not a political role. It's an administrative role inside the party. It's purely a managerial role. When it comes to making policy and deciding what the party's agenda is going to be, that's a decision for the Shadow Cabinet. We decide the direction of the party. We decide what the policies are going to be that we'll present to the electorate at the next election. This, I think, it is even more trivial than the usual Westminster village stories, and it's time, I think, that the party began to talk about the issues that really matter.
But you have to get the party on board.
And I think that Michael Portillo has to stop talking about the issues that most of our supporters will find trivial, because as well as distracting attention away from the very big issues, it's very, very disheartening to our supporters in the country when those who presumably see themselves at the top of the party talk about internal issues all the time.
You say that, but we have on the programme tonight John Stratford saying that morale is rock bottom. You have to listen to people like him. And people that are, the chief executive of the party, Mark McGregor, wasn't just an administrative figure. He was largely behind the tone and the tenor of the speech that Theresa May made at last year's conference, the nasty party speech. Are we not going to hear any more speeches like the nasty party speech?
I think to suggest that a party official wrote the words for the party chairman and she simply said them, I think is very demeaning. And Theresa May, who I know very well, is certainly more than capable of saying what she actually thinks herself. And I think that we'll increasingly now see the Shadow Cabinet bringing forward alternative policies. And I hope that we'll get a lot less of what are trivial side issues coming forward from Michael Portillo. Michael didn't win the leadership election. He's a very talented candidate. I did support him at the time. But I think that he now needs to let the party leadership get on with what it needs to do, which is to defend the Conservative philosophy, to bring forward Conservative policies, and to make sure that we can adequately combat a government which is failing on almost every single policy front.
Right. Newsnight has spoken to one MP who is going to start collecting signatures next week for a vote of no confidence in Iain Duncan Smith. Tomorrow morning's Independent will carry the story. The leadership challenge could start on Monday. The Times is carrying the story that the leadership challenge will be next week. Are you just sticking your head in the sand about this? Iain Duncan Smith is in severe danger.
Well, if we continue as a party to be constantly with a small group of people undermining the leadership, they undermined John Major, there was an undermining of William Hague, if they continue to undermine Iain Duncan Smith, First of all, they'll make the Tory party unmanageable, but far more importantly, they'll consign the government, this country, to government by a Labour government which has failed on every front and would be re-elected by default. And I think the Conservatives need to ask who their friends are and who their real enemies are. Tony Blair's best friends are Conservatives who fight amongst themselves. I was elected as a Conservative to put forward Conservative views. I intend to do that, so do my shadow cabinet colleagues, and will not be deflected by trivia.
But Iain Duncan Smith had his defenders.
But stories in the papers saying that MPs are going to try and gather the signatures.
There is constantly speculation in the papers about the future of any Tory leader. There are constantly stories in the papers about Tory civil war. I think the Tory party has been in a position for a decade or more where splits and disloyalty makes the running in newspaper stories, and the Conservative Party has to learn that in order to get over that hump, it has to be more united than it has ever been, because it's very easy for the media to write these stories.
Do you think he's going to survive, John Strafford?
No, I don't. I think that this is just one more episode in a series of episodes, and Ed talks about disloyalty. Well, the truth of the matter is that there has to be a loyalty. The leader can demand a loyalty and trust from the membership, but the membership also require loyalty and trust from the leader. And that's not what we've been getting over the last 12 months or so. Well, the truth of the matter is the party members are treated with contempt, the party board's treated with contempt, and the constitution of the party is treated with contempt. It will not do. We've got to get these things sorted out. And until we get them sorted out, we won't get our act together. And if we don't get our act together, we can't put a message over to the electorate.
Well, Ed Vaser, you say this has been going on for a decade or more. How are you going to sort it out?
Well, I think the Conservative Party has to learn to stop rowing in public, which is what happens. And this story was a story about internal changes within the Conservative Party, and it's been made into a national news story because everybody's got on their soapbox and given their opinion, and briefed the press, it has to be said. And people have got to stop doing that because it's a very easy story for the media to write. But I've got to disagree with John. I mean, I'm a party member, I'm a party candidate. I don't feel that Iain Duncan Smith has treated me with contempt at all. I think he's been a very effective leader, and I've constantly said, you know, I'm a so-called moderniser. I want the party to change, but I've constantly said that Iain Duncan Smith has made very significant moves to put the party back in a position to fight a good election.
Surely it's not, but it's not just about people going to the press and stories being written about what they say. It's more fundamental than that. The Tory, some would say, the Tory party hasn't resolved this problem of what it stands for any longer. Do you agree?
It is much more fundamental, and you know, it's all very well saying we can't row in public. Truth of the matter is you can't row in private either, because there are no longer any structures within the Conservative Party where there's genuine discussion and debate. There are no motions at a party conference, there are no motions at the National Forum. We're about to go to war. There's been no debate within the Conservative Party about
Well, I mean, John, you're living in a fantasy world if you think the Tory Party in the 1980s
democracy is
was
what
this open and democratic party.
Yeah,
the Conservative Party conference was famous in the 1980s for being a staged event, which the Labour Party, which the Labour Party then copied, and people have said the Labour Party's new slick image is very much like the Tory Party. I mean, that is a complete distraction. What the press try and latch onto is some so-called ideological split in the Conservative Party, and you'll see, for example, The Guardian saying Duncan Smith lurches to the right, and this is ridiculous. Duncan Smith has focused on public services and lower taxes, which, as far as I'm concerned, are two fundamental issues for the Conservative Party.
What are the chances that Ken Clarke could be leader? Very briefly.
Well, I'm not an MP, and I don't know what is going to happen.
And I think that he is the man who actually could save the party. He's the one with the stature and the status who appeals to the public. His views, he's hesitant about what we're doing on Iraq, and that's a big issue now for party members.
All right, well, we'll see what happens next week. Gentlemen, thanks. Super. Thank you.
In October 2003, the crunch came. A vote of confidence in the party leader.
Morning, folks. This is the Daily Politics. IDS told them to come and get him, so they did. Today's the day Tory MPs at last vote on whether to back or sack their leader.
Iain Duncan Smith has refused to bow out. Now he must face the judgment of his parliamentary party. Where did it all go wrong for the quiet man? What was it that so offended these malcontents? The bookies are suggesting Iain Duncan Smith won't last beyond 7 o'clock tonight. So if IDS does have to wave goodbye to the Tory leadership, who's in the frame to take over?
Over the next 2 hours, we'll gauge every shade of Conservative opinion. We'll have constant updates from Tory HQ and from the House of Commons, where we'll also be live at midday for what could be the final Prime Minister's questions of Iain Duncan Smith.
How will he do today? And what will the voters make of this feverish activity here in SW1? Well, Laura can tell us. Laura.
Today I'm in Beaconsfield in Buckinghamshire, and it's one of the safest Tory seats around. Away from Westminster, I'll be meeting Conservative voters here and trying to gauge if they think IDS has been stabbed in the back or if they too have been sharpening the knives.
Thanks, Laura. Now, 2 months ago, the official Tory line was that there was no conspiracy to undermine the leader. Then IDS admitted that there was, quote, a small band of malcontents out to do him down. By yesterday, the band was big enough, at least 25 Tory MPs. It could have been a lot more to trigger a vote of confidence in the Tory leadership. This afternoon, 165 MPs will do just that. Now, they're a very unpredictable lot, and Mr. Duncan Smith could surprise us yet. But the consensus here in Westminster is that IDS will be out by the early evening news. Daisy, how did it come to this for IDS?
Well, Andrew, it has certainly been a turbulent couple of years in the job for Iain Duncan Smith. Now, he seemed to be catapulted from nowhere to become Tory leader back in September 2001. Dubbed by some the ABC candidate, now that stands for anyone but Clark, he ended up head-to-head with the former Chancellor Ken Clarke, and in the vote of all Tory party members, he won 61% of the vote.
It's a great honour now that this party and its members have bestowed on me, that they have placed their trust in me to have elected me as their leader.
Well, things seemed to be on the up earlier this year when, in perhaps one of his biggest successes, the Tories swept the board at the local elections, winning the most amount of council seats. Tory electoral success suddenly seemed possible again.
Last night and today has been a fantastic result for the Conservative Party up and down the country. And I want to start by thanking all of those hard-working councillors, council candidates, association members and members of the party who have worked so hard to actually deliver Conservative councils into power and back into power up and down the country.
And to some, he seemed to have achieved the impossible, burying differences over Europe and producing a range of eye-catching policies that began to get the party noticed again.
He hasn't been the unmitigated disaster that some of his critics would have you believe, you know. He has produced some quite interesting policies. He buried Europe as a problem for the Tories with unexpected, spectacular results. And also, the bad thing about him, if you like, was his weakness, and he inherited that from William Hague. So there you have it. He's had good policies, he buried Europe, and his weakness wasn't really his fault.
Well, that was some good stuff, but it clearly hasn't been plain sailing for Mr. Duncan Smith. The Maastricht rebels soon got a taste of his own medicine, with the sniping and infighting among Tory MPs who were frustrated by what some saw as weak performances.
When I settle on a course, I stick to it. Do not underestimate the determination of a quiet man.
Some say he never looked or sounded like a future Prime Minister. Although the faithful applauded, they never quite believed in him, and the former Maastricht rebel proved persistently prone to paranoia.
A small group of my parliamentary colleagues have decided, consciously, to undermine my leadership. My message is simple and stark. Unite or die.
But although it was all smiles outside, behind the scenes at Tory HQ, senior staff came and went in rapid succession. IDS appointee Barry Legg was forced to resign as Tory Chief of Staff 3 months into the job, when it emerged he hadn't been properly appointed. He also faced criticism of the way he handled the party's position on the war with Iraq. Failure to make any impact in the Brent East by-election, where they were beaten back into third place, seemed to set the tone for things to come. Well, media training helped strengthen the voice, but some found the new aggressive style on display at the party conference pretty unconvincing.
The quiet man is here to stay, and he's turning up the volume.
And just when things seemed like they couldn't get any worse, Betsygate hit the headlines. Allegations that he'd employed and paid his wife Betsy for work she didn't actually do. And then came the plotters.
And if there's a rap on the door and Michael Spicer walks through and says, "I'm sorry, I've got 25 names," what do you say to him?
Go and put them in the telephone box.
Well, after all that difficulty, you'd think IDS would just want to pack it all in and go home. Not a bit of it. We had more fighting talk this morning.
I actually encouraged on Monday colleagues to put letters in, because my view is that we need to have this decision today. We can't go on like this with one small set of colleagues briefing against and undermining me. So my view was, please, let's have this confidence motion. Let's settle this today. I think the choice is simple. Either we decide to give me that mandate and for me to go on tomorrow to lead this party in opposition and to take the fight to Labour, present that alternative, or to plunge ourselves into internecine warfare for the next 2 to 3 months and have to pick up the pieces when the public says, what
Some
if they
party
do
loyalists there in Beaconsfield. It's a safe Tory seat. Laura, who's the favourite down there? What's going on?
Well, let's just find out. I'm joined now by some Tory activists here. We've got a senior councillor, the deputy mayor and the deputy chair of the Constituency Association all here with me now. Elsie Barton, I'll come to you first. You've been a councillor for 29 years. Yes. You've seen a lot of change in the Tory party. Who's your favourite to be the next leader?
Well, I really would like to keep to Iain Duncan Smith, and I would like this fighting to stop. If it's not going to, then we have to find a good leader. We really need somebody to do something about getting this Labour government out.
And who would that be for you then? There's huge amounts of speculation now. You know the names. Who would you pick?
Well, I don't know. It's very, very difficult. It is really very difficult to know who to choose. Michael Howard has been promoted. Well, I could stick with him. There's some I don't want to stick with.
Okay. All right. Alan Walters, you're the deputy mayor here in Beaconsfield. Who would you go for?
I think Elsie was right. The first thing we have to do is get rid of this Labour government. That's the first thing.
But you can't do that until you've got a decent leader. We can't do that until
we've got a decent... Well, firstly, we've got now the policies. Now the leader that comes next. We are now in this position that our MPs have put us in. We actually don't get a say in this unless there's a vote of no confidence. So I'd like to wait and see whether, in fact, there is this vote of confidence actually goes through or not. If IDS actually does gain the confidence of the Parliamentary Committee, then I think what we should do is put our weight behind him, get rid of all this fighting, 110% through until the next election. And I wouldn't want to hear another thing until then.
OK, all right, Alan, thank you very much indeed. Barry, that's fairly unlikely, it seems, this morning that IDS will stay. So who would you like to have instead, then?
Well, if, in order to reunite the Conservative Party, I do stress if, and Duncan Smith has to go, by a process of elimination, I think it comes down to Michael Howard, who has a wide experience, he is articulate, and I think he's more than a match for that artful fellow Brown at question time.
OK, all right, Terence Goodman, would you go with that, Michael Howard?
Absolutely, I reimburse all that my colleague here says. Michael Howard is articulate, has an analytical mind, and has been the only front bench speaker that I know of who's been able to has had any effect on the Chancellor and has been able to expose the fallacies of his policies.
Would he be able to shed, though, some of his history, some of his baggage from the past? Because in many ways, as Home Secretary, he didn't impress everyone, did he?
Well, he wasn't popular with the criminals, but as you rightly said, if you lock them up, they can't do any damage outside. Okay. And I find it difficult to argue with that one.
OK, Terence, thank you very much indeed. Well, Adrian Hilton, you're the Deputy Chair of the Conservative Association here in Beaconsfield. Yeah. Who will you go for if IDS goes?
As yet, there is no vacancy, and I think, in a way, the question is premature. My comment is possibly also irrelevant at this stage, for the simple reason that I'm in a party, the average age of which is 64 or 65. I think William bequeathed us a dog's breakfast of a system to elect our leader by. I'm now expected to hope and pray that the membership will appoint a leader that the electorates in the country will find appealing and wish to vote for.
Yeah.
That is as possibly hopeless as expecting Brian Sewell to give his blessing to the winner of the Turner Prize.
Well, you may say, Adrian, that you think your view is irrelevant. I don't think it is. I'm interested to know who would you plump for after 7 o'clock tonight if IDS doesn't win the vote?
Whoever it is, the Beaconsfield Association will be uncompromisingly loyal to them.
Will you give
That's
me
all
a
I have
name?
to say.
That's okay.
No, whoever it is, we will be loyal to them.
Okay, Adrian, obviously you're not going to actually reveal who your own personal choice would be, but Caroline Strafford, you're also a Tory member here in Beaconsfield. Who would you like to see?
Well, first of all, I've got to choose somebody, if I have a choice, who's going to appeal to the 6 million voters who haven't voted Conservative. We need to have a full choice, we need to be democratic about it, and there's still time, if there is a leadership challenge, to have the system changed. It's in the rules of the 1922 committee, and they just have to consult the board. And it's really important that we have as wide a choice put as possible. And it would be marvellous if it went out to the whole country and they did an American system of primaries. We've got to be much more democratic about it and attract young people, all sorts of people, and not stitch up the whole thing.
It's certainly an interesting point. Maybe the voting system was perhaps at fault when IDS came in, but very briefly, who would you like to see? Give me an answer.
I personally, I think if I'm given a complete choice, would go for David Davis.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much all indeed for joining us. Well, Daisy, thank you very much. We've been watching MQs here in Beaconsfield, and with me once again is Jonathan Steele, who's the constituency chairman here. We're joined also now by Roger Kendrick, who's a local party donor, and also Lenora Goodman, and you're a Tory party member here. Jonathan, briefly, how did he do at PMQs today?
Well, I think he chose two extremely safe topics for him. In fact, they were such safe topics it was almost boring in terms of being contentious, and it was not contentious. Everybody agrees about crime anyway, and Europe's a safe option because everybody in the party has almost the same view about Europe.
Okay, Roger, how did he get on at PMQs?
Well, the Labour government wasn't elected to take this country into a European constitution, and Tony Blair's position on it is totally untenable. But I'm afraid Iain Duncan Smith didn't really land the punch today.
Okay, all right, Lenora, how did he get on at PMQs?
I think I agree with Roger Kendrick on that last remark, and I think Iain Duncan Smith did better than I expected.
Okay.
Difficult day for him.
Okay, all right, well, let's move on now. These what have been very difficult times for the Tory party, and we may be looking at a 2 or even a 3-month leadership contest. That's going to be damaging for the party, isn't it? What effect is it going to have?
Yes, let's hope that it doesn't go the whole 3 or 6 months or whatever it is. I mean, it could be over, and I really hope it is over, in a much shorter time than that, so that we can get on with the business of defeating the Socialists and the Liberal Democrats, particularly in local politics as well as national politics.
But surely,
let's get it over with.
But surely all these business are going to affect and perhaps benefit Labour and the Lib Dems. I mean, look at Brent East, where the Lib Dems did so well.
But that's why I think we should have this now rather than later, because the general election is still possibly 2 years away, in which case we do have time to get our act together in time for the general election.
OK, Roger, I'd like to bring you in here. It seems to be a Tory speciality now, tearing each other apart. Aren't the other parties just going to take advantage of this?
Well, I don't think that's particularly important. At the end of the day, the Labour Party is split from top to bottom, and there are some differences of opinion in the Conservative Party, and you would expect there to be differences of opinion. The important thing is that the Conservative Party now needs to choose the person who's going to be the next Prime Minister of this country, and that is far more important than any short-term difficulties that may be caused.
OK, Lenora, how is this going to affect the party?
Well, it is going to be difficult for the next few weeks, but I agree with Jonathan Steele. I would like the members of Parliament to choose somebody and give them a resounding vote of confidence in whoever they choose, and that perhaps they'll give us, that they will choose somebody who's got sort of 60 to 80% support from the members of Parliament,
but even
and
once
to make it easier for us.
Even though, and briefly, once there is a long-term leader, won't all this trouble have caused long-term damage for the party?
Not if the leader manages to deal politely and nicely with you in the media and get our points over. And I think there was only one person who managed to do that in the last week.
And who was that, very briefly?
That was Michael Howard.
OK, all right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed all for joining us. We may have more of a clue who will be the next leader by the end of today, but from Beaconsfield, that's all from us.
All right, Laura, thank you for that. Quite a lot of pro-Michael Howard sentiment coming from the Tory activist in Beaconsfield. Let's see what other politicians make of that and of the impact of this leadership on politics as a whole. Joining me for the second day running, a privilege, as David Frost would say, Anne Widdecombe, Conservative MP, the Liberal Democrats Deputy Leader, Ming Campbell, welcome, another regular, and Labour MP Andy Burnham. Welcome to you as well. Does it fill you with fear and trepidation that your man who has something of the night about him, in your famous phrase, could be your next leader?
Well, I'm not going to join in the speculation on who could or couldn't be leader until I know. Until I know that we have a leadership election.
Well, you're not going to have a leadership election.
No, this, of course, is how all the turmoil comes about. You invite us to speculate, and we play the game. When we have a leadership election, Andrew, I'll answer you just the question that you've asked me. Yeah, I can come back tomorrow.
Well, all right, answer me this. On the vote of confidence election, which you are definitely going to have today, which way are you going to vote?
I'm voting in favour of Iain Duncan Smith.
Do you think you'll be on the winning side tonight at 7 o'clock?
Well, I hope I will be, but I don't know. I can't answer that question. All I know is that he's done everything that we asked him to do, from the gains in the council elections to the development of serious policy, to the lead in the opinion polls that we had before all this nonsense started. So, you know, given that he has kept faith with us, why wouldn't we keep faith with him?
A question I'll leave you to put to your colleagues at the 22 committee this afternoon.
Iain Duncan Smith lost the vote of confidence and resigned as leader of the party. The parliamentary party met and unanimously proposed Michael Howard as leader. He was the only candidate. The members of the party had no say in his election.